Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of Monarch Astrology and Magic of the Spheres podcast, bringing you an astrology forecast for the Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. And I'm choosing chaos by talking about this transit at within hours pretty much of Mercury stationing. I've already spoken in gibberish. I've made hot honey tea. I've gotten my weirdness out of the way, and I'm ready to share a transmission with you. So, Mercury and Sag. This video is going to be an overview of some of the things about this archetype and what you might be noticing thematically in the next few weeks, and that you're already in the soup of, because Mercury's been in Sagittarius for a bit. If I pull up my dates here, even November 7th was when the Mercury pre-shadow phase began. So a few asks for you before we begin. One, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Super helpful. A way to give back if you like the content here. Leave a comment also, say hello, or let me know what resonated with you. And if you've studied astrology with me before in the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive, coming up soon, beginning January 5th in the new year, I'm teaching a year-long advanced container called Diviner, which is in service to the art of cultivating your oracle nature. This is an opportunity to have a visionary experience through a study of astrology for a whole year together in stellar company. It's going to be lit. I'm so excited. And I want to direct you to the course page Diviner to read more about the curriculum and about this experience and what I'm inviting you into. These containers for my advanced students are just like amazing opportunities. Something that I'm really excited about in particular is that it's an opportunity to be in a laboratory around what it's like to live astrologically. Because when you speak this language fluently, you're living out your transits every day. And you also have like this room to play inside of not just how you interpret the transits, right? But how you interpret like what the assignment is for you during that transit. What is it that you're directly learning from it? How can you explore your creativity within the landscape? And this is something you get to do at an extra high level when you actually speak the language of astrology, which is what the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive, my first, I wouldn't say it's a beginner's program because it is all levels, but that's the foundation that once we have that, there's so many like fun, like really out there explorations we can go on together. So speaking of the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive, I am offering that again in April of 2025 for those of you who like to plan ahead. So the link for Diviner and for the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive, both of those links will be in the show notes. So let's get into it with Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius and the things that I wanted to point out to you. So the first one is brevity versus talking a lot. So there's a number of ways that we get conditioned to think that talking a lot or even oversharing, right, which is a word, has a negative connotation to it. We get conditioned to think that it's a problem. Whether it's the, training to only send short, concise messages for business memos because that's proper etiquette. And there's some truth to it, honestly. Sometimes if you send a long, rambling email, like unless you're sending, I've gotten some really long, visionary, magical emails that took my breath away, like clients sharing integration or something after the session or whatnot. But if someone who I don't know is writing me out of the blue, wanting to like get on the podcast or something, a rambling, winding, long message, it's too much, right? So there is that kind of conditioning in like business or something to be really clear about your pitch and whatnot, and that it's good to be short. Or maybe it's the idea that, you're trying to build a brand or get yourself out there, be visible on social media, and you're supposed to create like catchy 1 minute long reels as like the path to success, as though, long form isn't a thing. I mean, now like Substack and like the blog, I think is having a renaissance. But when I started my career and like my content creation in the way that I'm doing it today, I can't tell you how many like well-meaning people advised to me that I should create shorter content to appeal to the masses of people with quote short attention spans. I'm like, okay, whatever imaginary audience you're talking about, like even if I go viral doing that, like so what? Are those people my people? Will they convert? Like um are they here for the right reasons, you know? So I really felt see, here I'm doing it actually. Like I'm not being brief, but part of the message in it is like I'm also a Jupiter ruled Mercury. And it's hard to fit yourself in a box of brevity if your natural inclination or way of expressing yourself is long and winding. But the conditioning, in many ways, the messaging, you can definitely find the messaging that tells you to keep it short and neat. But Mercury in Sagittarius is a lot, talks a lot, has a big mouth, loves run on sentences and never ending stories. And in some situations, this is really charming and mesmerizing, you know, spinning a yarn and people are listening. But in other situations, it's considered a problem. Anything you can and say will be used against you in the court of law. So shut the F up, you know? So consider the possibility that our mental assessments of what should be brief and what should be long in terms of our communication or thought processes or even processes in general, like this value judgment around shortness, quickness, or like long form, maybe it's not true. Maybe it's not as much of a rule as we think it is. Consider as well honoring your natural tendencies in that regard. Some people are highly concise and efficient. I am blown away when people can do that. Some Mercury and Capricorn people, I'm like, damn, they can really organize a point in a really clear, concise way, and good for them. But other people are lyrical, poetic, and spin long tales helplessly. And so whatever your communication style or whatever is trying to emerge through you, consider the value or non-value of trying to contort that into any other shape. Right? There's subtleties here as well, because another one that I thought of was like uh, the skill of learning how to not over-explain yourself, like how to just state a need or a desire or a no without having to over-explain in a nervous way, right? So there may be different scenarios where you're reassessing, do I need to say more? Do I need to let out my expression? Or can I like be careful and watch my mouth? I wonder if astrologers are talking about this retrograde in the form of like, be careful what you say, don't overshare. But that's an opinion, right, at best. Because it's a personal choice where you draw the line of oversharing, right? Are you judging oversharing by a social standard or by how okay your nervous system is, how much capacity you have to go to the places that you're going, right? Like it's not the content, it's not the information, it's what boundary you crossed or didn't with it. Another thing I was thinking about was health and how repeatedly not expressing ourselves can create physical symptoms. And so in some situations, it may keep you, quote, safe to not speak up. And also it might be creating like a physical negative response. So really like opening up our minds this retrograde of what does it mean to have a big mouth or say the thing, right? Or not. The second thing is gaining bigger perspective, Mercury in Sagittarius is concerned with the pursuit of wisdom, higher knowledge, education, religion, and spirituality. Mercury in Sagittarius also has a natural ability to see the metaphor or the lesson inside of an otherwise mundane experience, right? So what's the 3D earth level narrative or thing that's happening, and what's the spiritual story or narrative that's unfolding? This means we may have like a double attention. For example, physically gardening, but experiencing like spiritual metaphors while your hands are in the dirt. Or having a relationship conflict and simultaneously having greater insight about what deeper spiritual awakening processes that it's activating within you to, what this person's bringing out in you, but what does it mean in the overall arc of your life story? I mean, that's one way to look at it, right? But Mercury in Sagittarius wants that really broad perspective about what's going on. And though Mercury in Sagittarius may not love the details, I do think that Mercury in Sagittarius tends to see the whole inside of the details. So inside of the fractal, inside of the small, like experience, however mundane it's being drawn up, there's like a universal lesson inside of it. Seeing your experiences through metaphor. So a problem that comes up within this is honestly just not having adequate perspective. This is what often inspires the seeking. Our spirit feels unwell when we don't feel that things are meaningful, or we don't feel coherent with our existing beliefs, right? Like if you, I'm over it now, but I had a moment like a few weeks ago where I was really concerned with just like how much energy it was taking for me to just do ordinary stuff. Things were slowing down, a lot of time on my fitness and cooking and whatnot. And I was like, is this all that I'm doing? Like, what is this about? And so I wasn't feeling like the meaning in all of this daily minutia. And it led me to seek perspective, or to make changes in my life and whatnot. So when you're kind of in like a daily grind, or you're in a situation and you don't feel meaning inside of it, that's going to create pressure during this transit, or maybe you've already felt that pressure and now you're in the kind of fun seeking part, the call to adventure part. But it's basically like, do you have perspective about what's going on in your life in a way that is giving you life? And is that perspective inspiring you to make life-giving changes? With adequate perspective or meaning, even difficult or even unbearable situations can grow more joyful. Like we can't underestimate how vitalizing meaning is for the spirit. And two, a lot of us aren't comfortable halfway, just like slapping meaning onto something if we feel like it's a lie, right? If we feel like we're like bullshitting ourselves, like we want the real thing. So Sagittarius has that like that zest, that fire of like, well, what does this mean? And has the energy to go look for those answers. And the tools that are at Mercury's disposal for higher perspective while in Sagittarius involve things like prayer. I just released an episode recently on Magic of the Spheres podcast with Daniela Gill about cultivating prayer. Highly recommend. Channeling, talking to guides, teachers, mentors, or healers. I woke up the other morning and was like, I need body work, and not like deep tissue. I need something like soothing for my nervous system, kind of like a energetic healing kind of thing. And then found this person, this magical person by the beach, or like she lives near the beach. And I was like, this feels so good. Like sometimes you just have to go to the magical person in the mountain or the beach who's like a healer and talk to them about your life and get some perspective. Right? Or anywhere that you experience education or learning. So I know I've just stated the obvious a little bit, but it's like Mercury in Sagittarius is about seeking bigger perspective. So, what are your tools, Mercury, for bigger perspective? Likely you already have some, and sometimes we just have to remember, like, oh, yeah, it's important. Like, I give astrology readings, like, I offer things. It's important for me to fill up my own well and like go get perspective too, right? Or like sometimes for people with Sagittarius, it's like travel, getting out of town, whatever it is, it's like that fresh or expanded perspective that really brings Sagittarius to life. And then the third thing that I wanted to point out was sorting illusion from truth. Mercury and Sagittarius could relate to a part of us, right? And so this is a transit. So it may not be your personal placement, but it is the influence in the air that's affecting our Mercury retrograde journey, right? So this is, at the beginning, I didn't go into the whole like spiel about Mercury retrogrades and how, yes, it is tech stuff, it is detours. It can also be psychological or mental, like we revise how we see things, how we think about things. So this is a trip that we're all on right now. So Mercury in Sagittarius is really pointing us to the part of us that's visionary, right? The part of us that has visions and visionary experiences. So whether you find that, constantly in your daily life because you're kind of like that, or it's through meditation or dreaming or plant medicine or different kinds of readings or what have you, it's like these semi-altered states in our life where we're accessing vision. And for those of you inclined to these visionary experiences, you might know that these experiences offer a kind of excitement and awe and connection to life. And that visions or intuitions do not always translate to exact truth. And so, if you're really comfortable with your intuition and with vision, you're not fretting, it's like it's whatever. But I think there is like a kind of Mercury, the mercurial, the logical, the rational mind that's like, but how do I know what the truth is? Or how do I know what's a sign? Or how do I know the difference between my fear and my intuition? Like those are all more mercurial, like rational mind things trying to figure out vision. And what's it like more when you just go into visions, logic? And I think in some sense, that's what Mercury retrograde may be quite good at. But I wanted to offer this perspective nonetheless on illusion versus truth. So personally, I've not really ever been super caught up about worrying whether or not my intuition was true or not. I had really compelling experiences that lit me up very deeply inside, and I just felt like a deep electric pulse in a direction over and over again. I do think it's a kind of perfectionist tendency to worry really hard about whether or not the intuition is okay or worth following. What I would consider instead is like, imagine the intuition is like a friend, right? Where it's like, I don't know if your parents said this to you also, like growing up, but it's like if your friends wanted to jump off a cliff, would you do it too? Like, you can still have discernment about the idea or the thing, and also feel into your own like boundaries or capacities. But I do think that intuition will often lead us to expansion, and expansion shows us where our edges are. So there is like a courage or there is like a trust or like a leap of faith, but sometimes it shows up in fairly simple or ordinary ways. I'll have some examples. Like for one, like let's say you have a a dream where you go to the beach. And that day you decide to go to the beach because you saw it in your dream. Or it's like, and maybe when you're at the beach, you see a poster or something or a sign about an event, and you go to that event and you make a friend or meet someone who's significant to you in some way. And it's like, there's just kind of a chain of events that happen when we play with following our curiosity, excitement, vision, impulse, instinct. So something I do consider instead of like, is my intuition correct or not, is like, am I willing to weave this intuition into my waking life? Like, what exactly is my resistance? Is it some personal block or trauma? Or is it common sense or wisdom or discernment? I know someone who a flower told him to attend a particular conference. He'd never heard a flower talk to him before, but his logic was, why would I not listen to the flower? The conference that the flower told him to go to set off a chain of significant experiences in his overall path and life direction. So, small whispers like this of intuition, where it's like, what if life is good and safe? Like, what if God loves us, right? And we get these ideas, and there's like a play or experimentation with leaning in to what these things are, as opposed to ignoring it, shrugging it off, and then choosing the ordinary conventional pathway of like, I'm not going to listen to what the flower said, like, and then just choosing the normal every day. And you can see how playing with intuition and visions is a form of playing with fire. In the flower story, it's pretty harmless and benevolent, but sometimes we also have visions that a person that we have like some kind of trauma bond with and have like a toxic connection with is our soulmate, right? Because a traumatized part of us or a part of us that's in that fantasy is having the visionary experience, and we get drunk on it. And we get to learn lessons that fun way also. The question for the retrograde, to back it up a little bit, is perhaps what relationship do we have with the part of us that is visionary and thinks non-conventionally? Do we allow ourselves to cultivate and explore it? Are we able to integrate the lessons? How do we cultivate specialized discernment when we're already off the fringe of normal? So normal discernment is like, don't listen to the flower. Certainly not like an indigenous, like indigenous discernment might say, listen to the flower. There's worldviews that we're considering, but whatever we're calling normal, if you're not thinking in a normal or conventional way, you might still be discerning or have a type of meticulousness about your thought. And so it's like things like spiritual hygiene or things like spiritual maturity, or things like discerning the difference between fantasy and deep inspiration, that are important mercurial parts of the visionary life. Intuition is a spiritual and instinctual current. It's a whisper from the soul. And the more we build a relationship with it, the more we can understand it and quite likely grow to trust it and know how it works uniquely for us. How can we expect our intuition to do wonderful and big things for us if we constantly ignore it in favor of conventional pathways? Intuition isn't just a thing, it's a conversation and a relationship. And on the other side of the spectrum, for anyone who is hyper into visions and willing to act on them, these types of people may often learn lessons through the dramas that ensue. At some point, following visions carelessly, if you ignore other signals or cues, becomes more expensive than simply a fun, wild exploration. So, what I mean by that, if I want to slow down here, is that if you're willing to play the game, if you're willing to play with fire, if you're willing to lean into visions, you might not be perfect at it at first. And there might be lessons that you learn through choosing to answer the call to adventure. Sometimes people respond to that by thinking that, well, they can't trust their intuition then. But it's like, no, you just have to get to know your intuition better and refine this line of communication. And so I just wanted to speak to both extremes of either not listening to the call to adventure or also being so, like off the wall about the call to adventure that there's some chaos and you end up having to learn how to organize yourself more. But all of this, I want to come back to the principle that I was saying at the beginning of discerning illusion and truth. One of my favorite things I've heard described about intuition, and this was from Richard Rudd in a course about the gene keys, but I'm paraphrasing, so I'm not sure if I'm getting it perfectly, but what I took away from it and what I think he was saying, if I remember correctly, is that the vision or the intuition doesn't have to be objectively true for it to still be doing its job of leading you somewhere. The question with Mercury and Sagittarius discernment is the vision coming in clear and without the need for translation or interpretation, or is it more symbolic? Is it pointing to something else? So by that, it's like you might have an intuition that gives you the energy to explore a direction, and then you explore it, and then a different path shows itself to you. So the original intuition was the code that you needed to kind of start moving, but it changed. Sagittarius is mutable, by the way. It changed once you answered the call. So it can be, if you're someone that has visions a lot, or you cultivate a practice to receive messages, there's a tendency within Sagittarius sometimes to want to freeze the vision into an ultimate truth, right? Like you get the calling and then you kind of put it at the altar and it is like the truth. And that can be the case sometimes, but also things change. And so with intuition, something about it being a fluid conversation, right? And you may be committed and devoted in something in your life. You could have a vision about building something. And that vision came through in a matter of half an hour, and then you spent 10 years building what you saw in half an hour. You can do that, right? Maybe you have done something like that before. And there's visions you have that lead you to an adventure, a side quest, and then you come back to, the course changes or whatnot. I also wanted to mention that if we're wanting to sharpen our sight or ability to see things in our life clearly, we become responsible for clearing our filters and illusions. So what if you saw people that you're in, saw people around you lovingly as they are, instead of with projections or illusions onto them? Like there's maybe some things to clear to be able to do that. How would you interpret a current conflict in your life if you experience some deeper level of healing around some long-term grudge or resentment you're holding on to? Right? Like, what are you seeing and what is making your filter very particular? The retrograde may offer us not just expanded perspective, but perhaps more clarity on the nature of our biases and assumptions and filters that tint our perspective in the first place. The pursuit of truth will show us new worlds, as well as show us our errors, blind spots, and parts of our philosophy ready to be revised also. So this is what I have for you. I hope that you are feeling resourced and supported and guided in whatever spiritual conversations that you may be having with yourself, with life, with your guides. One thing I'll say, I guess, in closing, is that sometimes things hurt, like we're in a kind of suffering because our perspective is skewed or distorted in some way. And that there is a particular kind of miracle that happens when we see something accurately through a higher perspective that releases us from our suffering, or that introduces a greater sense of vitality, meaning, joy, levity to what we're perceiving or what we're experiencing. So when I consider these kinds of things in prayer, and I think prayer is a really important technology, and do listen to that podcast that I published recently with Daniela Gill. There's any number of things you can pray for, any number of different perspectives, or, if you even just are curious of like this limited way that I'm looking at something, is there something more to it? Or how could I approach this situation in a way that would free up energy and like joyfulness in my system, in my consciousness? And ask those things to the universe. Like Sagittarius is all about pursuing wisdom, which we do through education and other humans. And it's also through our relationship to the more than human, to the earth, to the planets, to God, life. So I'm going to leave it there. Again, invite you to check out the course pages for Diviner if you have studied with me before. We begin January 5th in the new year. The course page for the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive beginning in April in 2025. And to please leave a comment and let me know how you're doing, what this brought up for you, anything that you want to share, or just say hello. It's always good to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.